After 8 long years, this Liberal government and its war on the Canadian middle class is finally being realized. Inflation is up, house prices are up, the debt is up, bankruptcies are up. Canadians are visiting food banks in record numbers. 300,000 of them went in a single month in Toronto. 1 million more Canadians will visit a food bank next year than this year. They are joining Facebook groups to learn how to dumpster dive so they can feed their families. What's happening today is a far cry from the Canada that we used to know, from the Canada that many of us were promised. Canadians are asking why. Why does food cost more and more every single time you visit the grocery store? Why does gas cost $2 a litre? Why is it harder and harder to pay the bills at the end of every month? Well, at the root of this complex problem is a simple explanation, in just 2 words, in fact. These words are the carbon tax. The Prime Minister's carbon tax is adding more to the cost of nearly every basic necessity that anyone in this country buys anywhere. It's not complicated for Canadians. When you tax the farmer that grows the food and you tax the trucker that brings the food, you end up taxing the family that eats the food. Every single family, everywhere in the country. It is, however, a difficult concept for Liberals and their NDP masters to comprehend. It's because they don't talk to people anymore. You see, the MPs who are being forced to defend the indefensible over there are just about pulling their hair out right now. If you listen to them, they'll jump down your throat and huff and puff and spout misinformation about rebates and money that you're getting back. But, Mr. Speaker, they're using Liberal math. It's Liberal math that says an Ontario family that pays $1,674 gets back $1,047. And they'd say they're better off. It's Liberal math that says the Albertan who pays $2,943 and gets back $2,032 is better off. It's Liberal math, like some bizarre fantasy telling Canadians that less is more and they are somehow better off. This is the same Liberal math that tells Canadians that budgets will balance themselves, that monetary policy isn't important, and that $60 million for ArriveScan is some kind of accounting error. Mr. Speaker, Canadians don't live in Liberal land. They live in the real world. They look at their empty fridges at home. They look at the price of gas at the pumps. They don't do Liberal math. They do real math. The real math is getting harder and harder every day as budgets and bank accounts and borrowing are stretched to the limit. For everyone, everywhere. They used to talk about the environment until the caucus revolt from his East Coast MPs, the Prime Minister's East Coast MPs, that forced him to admit that his tax was a tax and that it was too much, and then he backed down from his signature fake environmental policy. And he gave them what they wanted until, of course, the next election. The radical Minister of the Environment had a different takeaway yesterday. He told Canadians that we can't put climate change on hold. And I agree with him. Which is why it is so infuriating to see this carbon tax used under the guise of somehow improving Canada's environmental performance. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, we rank 62nd out of 67 countries when it comes to climate performance. The Environment Minister could have scaled more floors on the side of a tower than 62 by now. The only emissions target we ever met was during COVID, when the government shut everything down in this country. Our taxes are up, our costs are up, and our emissions are going up. So if the carbon tax doesn't give Canadians more money and it doesn't help the environment, then what are they doing here? Well, we know, and Canadians are finding out too, it makes the Prime Minister richer. More money flowing into the pockets of his Liberal coffers. There it could be funneled to insiders and his well-connected friends. Those are the only people in this country that are better off after 8 years. It means more money to spend on high-priced consultants, more money to spend on trips around the world, and yes, more money to somehow make an $80,000 app $60 million. Madam Speaker, we all know this, the true cost, the true impact, and yes, the true intention of the carbon tax. It really seems like a sick joke that this Prime Minister would choose to raise it once again. And it's not just by a little. It's by a whopping 23% on all Canadian families, on farmers, on First Nations, in less than 2 weeks. And it's not just because the tax is being raised, it's because it costs so much to achieve so little, and that's the story of this government. And it's because it comes probably at the worst time for Canadians in a long, long time, probably since we had a prime minister with the same last name as this one. 51% of Canadians are less than $200 away from bankruptcy, and a 23% increase means they're even closer, probably $200 more every year for the average family. More money flowing out of the wallet and not back into it. It's even more money at the pump, at the grocery store, and at the bills at the end of every month. It's a kick to Canadians that are already down, and it's no surprise that 70% of Canadians and 70% of premiers, including Liberal premiers, and even more opposition parties across the country oppose this increase. It's because they all know what we know. This tax isn't worth the cost, and neither is this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister says that these Canadians and these premiers just don't have principles. But he's got it all wrong. They have something that he has never understood. They have bills to pay, they have mouths to feed,
for real,
and they have to get to work every day. I have some advice for the Prime Minister through you, Madam Speaker, and I say this to everyone, to everyone else saying that things are wrong. Maybe it's time for him to finally look in the mirror instead of blaming everyone and everything else. We have been here for nearly 2 years. Conservatives have tried everything to force this government to listen to Canadians, but they just don't care. The Canadian people are tired of being taxed to death. They are tired of runaway inflation and runaway spending, and they are tired of being told it's all their fault. They deserve a say in this 23% tax increase. So today, this motion of non-confidence in this Prime Minister will allow every Canadian to go to the polls in a carbon tax election and have their say. It is the only right thing to do when Canadians have been pushed so far to the limit after 8 years of this Prime Minister. It is the only right thing to do when the increase literally means the difference between solvency and bankruptcy for so many. And this Liberal government, if they're so confident in their carbon tax and so confident that that everybody else is wrong, then they shouldn't be afraid to let Canadians have their say. Let Canadians weigh in. And if the Liberal NDP members from Atlantic Canada, rural Canada, and frankly any part of Canada truly represent their constituents, then they would have the guts to stand up and vote against their boss today. It is long past time to axe the tax. And time is absolutely running out for Canadians right across the country, no matter where you live. But, Mr. Speaker, there is hope. There's hope on the horizon for a government led by the Leader of the Opposition. And Canadians will finally get their say in a carbon tax election. If they choose to vote with the Prime Minister today, we will eventually have a carbon tax election in this country, and Canadians will have a choice. They will have a choice between a Liberal government that divides to conquer and taxes to spend, bolstered by an even more reckless NDP that only exists to say yes to everything that the Prime Minister demands. Right. Or they can have a party that will finally axe the tax and build
what was interesting is I was looking at the vote yesterday, and Jagmeet Singh actually voted in support of the Conservatives for the spiking on the tax, on the carbon tax.